Show of hands. How many in here are in their 50s or older? I'm not going to ask by how much, yeah, or close. Do you guys remember when they told us that we would have to stay about 40 years in the workforce? Retire at 65 and all that, yeah? Does that ring a bell? And that the education that we got as young people would last throughout our careers. Now, how many in here are in their 20s or younger? Congratulations. On so many dimensions, but I don't know if you know this. You're going to have to stay in the workforce for 50 years or more. And the skills you acquire now will last you for 5 to 10 years at most. In other words, you're going to have to re-educate yourselves completely at least 4 times in your career. We face one of the greatest educational challenges in history. What's happened over the course of the 30 years that separate the generations in this room is that education as we know it, that one intense sprint in the beginning of a long career, has become less and less relevant to our working lives. I believe that our employers, the companies we work for, whether public or private, will have to step up, deliver, and pay for the continuous re-education we're all going to need. In fact, I believe that they're going to have to pay for continuous re-education of not only their own employees, but also the millions and millions of people who are unemployed, because I believe that neither governments nor the education system has the money or the capacity to do that on the scale we're talking about here. But let's cut that up in 3 pieces, yeah? Let's first talk about why the 4th industrial revolution that we're in right now requires continuous re-education to an extent that we've never had to deal with before. Then let's talk about what happens if companies don't step up to this challenge. And then let's talk about what the world would look like if they do, and how you and I can make them. So, we are in it. Industry 4.0, the 4th industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, whether we want to or not. And like the previous 3, it's about work. It redefines what work has to be done, how and by whom. But unlike the previous 3, it will do that over and over and over again. Because our industrial revolution is driven by technology's capacity to replace human input, thereby fundamentally changing work, what's left for us to do. And that technological capacity, as you know, grows exponentially, in simple terms, over and over and over again. And as technology's capacity to replace us changes over and over and over again, work and the skills required to perform it will change over and over and over again. We're looking at continuously changing jobs and skill requirements. Artificial intelligence, robots, other advanced technologies are predicted in the next mere 15 years to directly impact as much as 30 to 50% of all current jobs globally. We will see fewer drivers and more autonomous vehicles. Volvo and the government of Singapore are testing large buses on public roads right now. There are experiments in Oslo and Aalborg. It's coming. We will see fewer construction workers and more big robots on construction sites. It's cheaper, more efficient, what have you. And while in my supermarket we've been able to check out our groceries for a while, we will then continue to see fewer cashiers, but the next thing is that it'll be scanners that will check out our groceries for us, so we just walk right through. But we will also see fewer auditors, financial analysts, lawyers, journalists, because artificial intelligence now is capable of taking over previously prestigious and high-paid jobs, of synthesizing complex data and, frankly, doing a much better job at it. Many of those jobs evidently will disappear entirely. Many others will change beyond recognition and require new skills. And new jobs which we can't even fathom yet will emerge and require new skills. And all those new skills will, of course, be about how do you work with and alongside some pretty mind-boggling technology. Speaking of mind-boggling technology, how many in here really understand blockchain technology? Be honest. You know, the technology behind Bitcoin and soon everything else? Do I see any show of hands? A few people? Good for you. I don't. As in, not at all. And if you're anything like me, you vividly can appreciate what it's going to be like to have to learn to work with and alongside some pretty mind-boggling technology over and over and over again. Which, of course, brings me to a story of my grandmother. My grandmother was born in 1913 and lovely, and I miss her. And when she was in her 70s, for reasons I'm sure you can appreciate that I have suppressed from memory entirely, my brother and I decided that she needed what was then cutting-edge technology. In the 1980s, a fax machine. Of course she did. Everybody needed a fax machine, and we didn't want her to fall behind the curve. She must have loved us a lot, because she actually listened as we unfolded our argument about how much time she would save. She had retired, she had all the time in the world on her hands and frequently complained about that, but never mind, she listened. However, we failed to explain to her how her beautifully handcrafted letters got onto the receiving paper at the other end, and failed to convince her. But ladies and gentlemen, you and I, we are all my grandmother. We are all going to have to get our heads around what to us is completely mind-boggling technology, and we're going to have to do that over and over and over again. We need help. Clearly not from the likes of my brother and I, but like proper qualified help. Who's going to step up? Let's start by imagining that no one did. I advise multinational companies for a living. And I know this company that some years ago set up a factory in a developing country. In return for creating hundreds and hundreds of jobs, they got a tax break and other subsidies, which is all kosher and normal. And since they have automated production in that factory to an extent that they had never anticipated. And now they face a dilemma. What do they do with those hundreds and hundreds of workers whom they don't, or soon don't, really need anymore? Tell the government, thanks for the tax breaks. You can have your workers back now. Well, let's imagine that they did. Let's imagine that every company continued to do that. Fire people, without further ado, at a period of time when we're talking about up to half of the workforce having their jobs disrupted by technology, probably landing in some kind of more or less temporary unemployment and needing serious reskilling. Imagine that level of unemployment. You have a job. You don't. You have a job. You don't. You have a job. You just lost yours. And you are now going to have to figure out how to get the digital age skills, the ticket, if you will, to get yourself back on the bus. And you're going to have to do that on your own. Good luck. Imagine the level of social resentment. We haven't seen levels of unemployment like that globally since the Great Depression. Forget about the Occupy and Yellow Vest movements, or the recent rise of populist politics. That will be as nothing compared to what we would have to live through. Now, let's instead imagine something else. Let's imagine that companies did step up. Let's imagine that that company that I know said to the government, listen, we're sorry. We can't employ these people anymore, but we're going to give them the digital age skills, the ticket, that they need to be successful elsewhere. And we're going to do that regardless of their level of basic skills or literacy, before we lay them off. That's on us. Imagine that every company did that, basically guaranteed you that you would always have a fresh ticket in your hand. They would help keep unemployment rates low, but even more so, they would effectively keep potentially massive social resentment at bay. How do we make them do that? That, for once, is easy. You just start to worry. Because if you worry about whether you have a fresh ticket in your hand, you're going to move toward employers who actually, genuinely offer great learning environments, who keep your ticket fresh. And you're going to leave companies that don't get it, or don't want to, with employees whom no one else wants only. So, good for us. We have an employer, and we're going to pressurize them to keep our skills fresh, and now we have a ticket. But the United Nations Labour Agency, ILO, estimates that globally, 200 million people who have the age and the capacity to be in the workforce are outside of it. Hang on. We've just agreed that all the re-education we're going to need happens inside the workforce. How on earth are those 200 million people going to get themselves a ticket, let alone getting it refreshed? Who's going to deliver and pay for that? Would that be a job for the kind of multinational corporations that I advise? Yes. Because if you have the money and the infrastructure, and they do, to provide continuous re-education for your own 50, 100, 150,000 employees, you sure have the money and the infrastructure to offer the same to 10, 15, 20, 25,000 unemployed people. I'm not talking about giving them a job, that's nice but unlikely. I'm talking about extending your corporate social responsibility to help all of us keep social resentment at bay at a particularly turbulent time in history. I know senior executives who get that, who would feel proud and want to do that. But senior executives are inherently risk-averse when it comes to politically sensitive topics. They don't want to get into a debate about why the government isn't doing more, what's wrong with the education system, what role should the unions play, and all the rest of it. They need us to make it a safe, uncontroversial intervention for them to basically provide continuous re-education for everyone, including unemployed people. And we know how to do that because we've done that before. We put human rights and environmental protection on the social or corporate social responsibility agenda through agitation and through voting with our wallets, consumer activism. And we can do the same here. So, essentially, which world we will live in really is up to you and I. I suggest we all start to worry to get ourselves a ticket and start to agitate and vote with our wallets to make sure that everybody else gets one too. Thank you very much. Thank you.